Hey, this is Jeffrey Giesener, the founder, creator, and producer of the film In Our Memories Kitchen. The film is presented free of charge by the Jewish Culture and Holocaust and October 7th Remembrance and Stand Against Hate International Communities. Thanks for joining us for this beautiful, dynamic two-part program of food memories and recipe stories about how concentration camp survivors lived through starvation and inhumane conditions while still demonstrating strength and resilience against the Germans. You'll witness amazing stories from survivors and the parents of second-generation survivors who proactively fought against life-or-death experiences and severe personal risk in the camps by speaking about recipes, memorializing them in writing, and experiencing food memories of their childhood. Listening and realizing how survivors overcame the most torturous crimes is a testament to their human spirit and will to live. Our featured survivor guests, those who are currently with us and those of blessed memory, are Rachene Kanter, Keineg, Elsa Brunner, Tova Friedman, Eugene Ginter, Sami Steigman, Jacqueline Gemach, Ruth Zimbler, Ahart, and Stephen Fenves. Recipe authors, chefs, and historians share their Holocaust food memories and recipes. Books and videos are Cara D. Silva of Blessed Memory, In Memories Kitchen, June Hirsch, Food, Hope, and Resilience, Eva Moraremi, Hidden Recipes, A Holocaust Memoir, Dana Schrager, founder of DanaTable.com, Facebook's Jewish cooking community, Chef Alon Shaya, historian from the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Edina Friedberg, and Jeffrey Giesener, or Jeff the Baker, is better known as the founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust October 7th Remembrance Community. Jeffrey has recreated 50 of his mom's, Eva, European pastries and posted the recipes on the community website in the Eva's Kitchen recipe channel. A word of caution: even in a food recipes documentary, the subject matter may cause challenges for some survivor and generational survivor audience members. The photos, video, recordings, music, pictures, and content of this film may be disturbing to some who suffer, like I do, from intergenerational survivor trauma or PTSD disorders. As a second-generation survivor, I am very cautious about selecting the content for this film. It is nothing you have not seen before. All of our on-demand films are free to all audiences. Please help us by subscribing to the YouTube channel for Jewish Culture and Holocaust on October 7th. You will be automatically notified of the new on-demand films released weekly.
My brother was 19 years old, very hungry. When he ate, he always kept his hand underneath, maybe a crumb will fall, so not to lose this food. And he didn't care for anything, just how to get some more food and share it with us, my sister, myself.
Of course, once hunger became a predominant state of mind, the only thing you could think of was how to secure food, because food meant life meant survival. Whether you did this subconsciously or consciously or otherwise, there was no thought for anything else, really. There was no lofty thoughts when the stomach is empty, no matter where you are, no matter who you are. Consequently, it became, we even coined the phrase for it. We didn't steal food, we organized it. The word was organized. And we developed various methods of organizing food for ourselves. And if you're lucky enough and alive enough and imaginative enough, you could always get a little more than what the Germans dealt out to you. Bread was, of course, at a premium. So we organized the bread brigade. There's 6 of us. The bread was brought into the camp early in the morning in big vans. And they were like bricks, and they were piled on the van really high. And on top, they stuck out a little bit higher than usual. So we developed a technique where we would jump from a tree, 2 or 3 of us, right on top of the trunk, and just simply sweep the bread out on the ground, 2 or 3 of the other fellows would be coming by and pick it up immediately. We would jump off the van and disappear. One had to take risks, I suppose, to live, retrospectively speaking, and it's exactly what we did. It was a vegetable, heavy, thick vegetable concoction of soup. We were given what you might call a liter of it, 1 scoop, into a dish, into a bowl. I remember it was a maroon-colored bowl that we always wore. It was hanging from the belt together with a spoon. You didn't dare lose it, because without that you didn't eat. So we started to get into the routine of lining up in the morning for tea, plain tea, nothing else. Lunch, we would have a bowl of soup, similar to the one I described. And at supper time, 1 loaf of bread was divided amongst 8 people, very expertly cut. And either a small slice of margarine, or some margarine and jam, or some salami was put on it. And that was supper.
Food, of course, is one of the best ways to experience culture. Not only are we using our senses to take us back in time, but oftentimes we're in the kitchen listening to stories as we're preparing those recipes, and stories that let us know what it was like and why we should never forget about the past.
Shabbat Shalom.
Tova Friedman. There's one ingredient that matters most during Friday night Shabbat dinner: family.
Shalom.
3 generations gathered around the dining room table. It's a dream that Friedman never imagined would be possible as a 5-year-old in Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp.
I'm surprised that you survived the Holocaust.
Yes and no, because being a child, I didn't think about survival or not survival. I was more concentrating on surviving every hour. And every hour, every day was like, wow, I'm still here.
It's a fear that 84-year-old Eugene Ginter also endured. His first 6 years of life were spent in that same extermination camp.
About face. And then my father, who spoke perfect German, he found out that they had gotten orders, because the Russians were so close, that they were only to burn the bodies of the dead, but not to gas anymore because of the evidence.
So you were minutes away from dying.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you remember the details so well?
Because these memories are so vibrant, so vivid.
I could close my eyes as a child, and if I heard the boots of the Germans, I can tell you which German it was, somebody to be feared or somebody who's safe.
The sights and sounds of genocide never left them. Neither did the feeling of starvation.
When people say to me, what did you think in Auschwitz? Food. I had dreams about food. Food was a constant thought, and it was connected with life or death all the time.
What was the worst for me was the thirst. When I was on a transport and there was 3 days without water, that stuck with me to this day. I still have to have some water nearby. So, you know, I have to have some water because it gets to me.
Do you remember your first real meal after liberation?
In Auschwitz, there was this terrible smell of burning bodies permeated everywhere. But then I began to smell another smell. And I said to myself, after the liberation, what is that? She said, that's the making of bread. I still remember that.
How did those experiences shape who you are today?
Oh, it changed me completely. I made my life a monument, sort of what Hitler tried to kill. 4 children and grandchildren. I tried to resurrect that which Hitler wanted to destroy.
After liberation in 1945, they both eventually settled in the U.S. They've been building their lives through the families they've created.
Just amazing.
And the traditions they're passing on to the next generation, like Jewish recipes. Their favorite dishes are featured in this new cookbook, Honey Cake and Latkes, Recipes from the Old World. Friedman and Ginter met while working on the book, published by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation. It includes more than 100 Holocaust survivor stories paired with family recipes.
Food reminds you of your family and the love, like the cheesecake or the babka that my mother would make. You know, it brings back the memories of the love that she was transferring.
Food was always so internal. Food are always...
Help people understand and connect the dots to why survivors like yourselves are fearful that something like the Holocaust could happen again.
I'm fearful that it can happen again because most people don't know any history. They're not aware of what happened.
What do you want people to remember about the Holocaust?
My story can be duplicated by 1.5 million children who were murdered. I was just lucky. I feel almost obligated to talk about them. It's like I am bringing them back from their ashes because I represent them.
I had my first interview with this wonderful woman. Her name was, we lost her not long ago, so may she be a blessed memory. And Regina was my first interview. And Regina came to my home and we sat at my dining room table and she told me her story. And it was truly the first time that I had ever really had this kind of an interaction with a Holocaust survivor. I had heard them speak, I had gone to exhibits, but I had never had a one-to-one conversation. And I'm going to say that I'm assuming most of you have. And I'm sure that you all know it's life-changing because the stories that they share and the perspective that they have is truly so unusual. We are flustered and flummoxed with the smallest little things in our lives. And you speak to a Holocaust survivor and you hear what they've endured and how they have turned tragedy into triumph. And you realize that pretty much anything is possible. And Regina was no exception to that rule. And she told me her story and she told me about the people she lost and she told me about the amazing people she found. And we got through it. And you could see that when the story was finished, a smile returned to her face, her hands unclenched. And I said, Regina, now's the easy part. Share with me your signature recipe. And let me say that I do the absolute worst Eastern European accent on the planet. So my apologies to those of you whose names I am looking at and undoubtedly have these beautiful Eastern European accents. Mine sounds like the Muppet, the Swedish chef Muppet. I don't know if you remember him, but that's my accent. I'm going to do it anyway. And Regina said to me, what's a signature recipe? And I said, Regina, it's the dish you make all the time for your friends and your family. And she says, well, Mamala, that would be Kluski. And I said, okay. I get out my paper and I get out my pen and I'm very excited to begin writing her recipe. And she says, oh, Mamala, it's so simple. You take some potatoes and you mix it with some flour and you have Kluski. And I looked at her and I said, you know, Regina, maybe you'd have Kluski, but somehow I don't think I'm going to have Kluski. Are there eggs? She said, of course there are eggs. What do you think is going to hold it all together? And with that, I looked at her daughter, Evelyn, who was with me, and I was in a panic. And Evelyn said, don't worry, I speak Regina. And with that, she says, Mom, when you go to the supermarket and you buy the potatoes, do you buy one potato? Do you buy two potatoes? And Regina says, no, sweetheart, I buy a bag of potatoes. And she says, and Mom, when you buy the potatoes, are you able to carry the bag yourself? She looks over her shoulder like it was yesterday for me. And she says, well, last time I checked, there was nobody carrying potatoes for me. And she says, and Mom, when you make the Kluski, how many potatoes do you have left in the bag? At that point, I had known Regina for maybe 45 minutes, but I knew the answer to that question. She says, Mamala, I lived through the Holocaust. Do you think I would waste a single potato? And with that, Evelyn turned to me and she said, 5 pounds of potatoes. That is how every single recipe unfolded. I was given a recipe for half an eggshell of matzah meal. Is that a jumbo egg? Is that a medium egg? Well, I found out because I made that recipe over and over again, using a big eggshell, using a little eggshell, until I figured out what size eggshell was really the right one to convey the recipe. Now, many of you have recipes that have been handed down to you, and the cook, and I use the term loosely, but the recipe preparer, they would say to you, use a glass of oil. And I am sure that some of you know that back in the day, that glass was a Yortzeit glass. Now, those used to be these huge tumblers. Now, they're these tiny little votive candles. Well, that makes a huge difference in a recipe. So I took every single dish I was given and I made them and remade them over and over again, so that I was sure that the reader of the book would be able to replicate the recipes exactly correctly. And after a year, my sainted husband, who's sitting so quietly in the next room, turned to me and he said, for 1 year, we have eaten like 80-year-old Polish peasants. And I laughed and I said, what's so wrong with that? He says, nothing. He says, I am not complaining a bit.
A lot of it took place in the evening when women could speak to each other after lights went out. They would talk about who they were, who they had been, in terms of the foods that they cooked. They would exchange recipes. They would talk about food, talk about their homes and the dinners they made. This was often called cooking with the mouth because you had nothing to eat.
I'm Bianca Steiner Brown, but for 3 years in Theresienstadt or Theresin, I was only a number. The number's BF 621. Mina Pechter, the creator of the notebook that became the book, in Memory's Kitchen, was also only a number, AAR 312.
The handwritten scraps and jottings were collected by a woman named Mina Pachter and were finally published more than 50 years later. Survivor Bianca Steiner Brown translated the recipes into English.
Sadly, I never met her. Mina Pechter was 71 years old. She died in Terezin of malnutrition in 1943. I was lucky. I survived. Bread you got every 2 or 3 days. And that bread had to last you. It was what we have here, let's say a rye bread, it was a quarter of a rye bread for 3 days. My bunk was a third one up, and I tried to go to sleep, and these women started discussing recipes. And I was hungry. These recipes had 4 eggs, and you have too much sugar or whatever it was. And I was so mad at them because I needed the sleep, especially since I had very little food, nourishment in me.
The thought of women doing this was very shocking because you just think of people who were starving to death as sort of resigning from the fleshly pleasures. And instead, what I discovered is that, on the contrary, I think it helped them to live. I think, even though the food was imaginary, because I think food nourishes not just the body, but the spirit.
Well, we couldn't imagine that most of our families will be killed. So you lived in somehow maybe in a dream world, let's say, that you couldn't, that you really felt, well, all right, it will be over in a while. And then we'll go home and I will cook or bake or whatever.
I mean, there's just no way of knowing exactly the circumstances. But the original manuscript, which is hand-sewn and filled with these fragile handwritings on this crumbly paper, about it's the world of these women as embodied in these recipes. There's a recipe in that book that I found for caramels from Baden. This woman would recite, the ingredients, use this, use that, everything else. And then at the end, she said to wrap them in pink paper. And there was something about thinking about someone in a concentration camp, carrying the fantasy of food that far or attempting to do it exactly right. That was such an incredible thought. The sense when one reads the recipes is not of shortcuts because they each knew each other's food, but rather of an inability to really write it down because they could no longer write it down. And so that you get reversed steps and you get things that aren't completed and you get sentences that just run off into space. And of course, one also has to speculate. Someone was called for a transport in the middle of writing a recipe. You just don't know.
Bianca is cooking recipes from the book to serve at an adult education program, where she will speak about her experience at Terracin.
Food is a powerful identity marker. It's one of the most powerful identity markers in the world, meaning the food of your childhood, what you grew up with, your celebrations, your memories of the meatloaf your mother made, these wonderful Svechkin cakes, and all of these other things. Those things are really imprinted on us in a very, very powerful way, whether we realize it or not. And I'm not saying these women realized what they were doing. I'm saying that one of the results of what they did is that they fought with Svechkin cake and Erdapfel Dalken and things like that. That in a funny way, it was fighting back when somebody's trying to erase you.
1, 2, 3.
I have come to feel that at some level it was being done for us. It was being done for the unseen others who might someday make these recipes again.
If food is a symbol of love, then a recipe passed on to an unknown future is a message of hope. And the desire to feed others, whether it can be realized or not, becomes a powerful affirmation of life.
I grew up in a kitchen that was really busy and full of people. A lot of my childhood memories are being in the kitchen with my mom or grandma. My mom would often have her sisters over, my aunts, or my sister would be in the kitchen. So there was a lot of camaraderie and life and happiness in the kitchen as everybody cooked together and collaborated on making a family holiday or family meal. Most of the holidays being Jewish holidays. And so sort of I grew up in the kitchen. Originally, when I was in my 20s and I was trying to recreate a family recipe, even most of them were my family recipes, but even one of my best friends, when her baby was born, I came to visit her and she shared with me her secret stash of her grandma's rugula. And because she was so thankful I came to help her with her newborn. So she's like, go in my freezer. I have rugula my grandma made. And the rugula was so good. I said to her, I have to have your grandma's recipe. So she called her grandma on the phone we get chicken scratchings of a recipe. It's really barely there. And I'm like, I can't make this. I don't know what to do. So what did I do? I turned to the 2 Jewish cookbooks that I had gotten as wedding presents. And one was by Joan Nathan, Jewish Cooking in America. And the other was by Faye Levy, Jewish International Cooking, I believe that cookbook is called. And Faye has over 20 cookbooks now, and I have a few of them, and Joan has over 12, and I have quite a few of those as well. But I had to use those as my references. So I had to take my chicken scratchings and compare to other recipes to figure out, what this recipe might be saying. And then
talk about how you use Excel, because I think that's really
okay. Now is I make a handwritten chart, and I've done this. I guess I must have done this since way back long ago. But let's say it's kugel. Let's say it's noodle kugel. So I, down one column, put all the possible ingredients. And then I also put different variables of the procedure, like temperature and time and pan size, tips. And then across the top, I put every single author or website that I want to check out or compare. So they say they use this many noodles, they use this much cottage cheese, this one uses cream cheese, this one doesn't, this many eggs. And, I start comparing and I go, like Jeffrey, I know Jeffrey does the same. I go, there's an outlier here, 2 eggs. Nobody uses that few. And then, this person uses 8 eggs. I don't want to use that many. Most people don't use that many, not that many. So, then I say, well, it looks like most people use 4, some people use a little more, a little less. And then I start trying to figure out, and then I think, well, what do I want it to be? So when I developed my kugel recipe, which developed over time and is an amalgamation of a lot of people's recipes, I really like apple in my kugel. Some people put pineapple, some people put raisins. I really like cream cheese in kugel. My aunt taught me that, one of my aunts. And then as soon as I made her recipe with cream cheese in it, I like that lusciousness that brings to the kugel. So anyway, it's a lot of research to compare recipes and start thinking of your own sensibility. Like if you're baking, if somebody doesn't put salt, just like at least a pinch or a little bit of salt in the baking, more times than not, I'll add salt. I go, no, you need the salt to highlight all the flavors, counterbalance the sweet. If they don't put vanilla in the recipe, oftentimes I will add vanilla. So it's adding your own likes from your own experience, as well as comparing
the same recipe twice.
Yes, I could definitely make I try to figure out, based on this method, what are the likely ingredients and proportions, but it doesn't always come out right the first time.
No,
I have to say,
once you find it working, do you repeat it and you keep it?
If I love it, yes. If I love it, I definitely make it again.
Yeah,
it could be.
Can I tell you that I never repeat the same recipe, even if I love it?
Yes, but then you go, well, this time I'll add in Heath bar or something. So isn't it sort of the same, but with a twist?
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
For Passover, I did something unusual, closer for Passover noodles, but with dark chocolate and Nutella and marshmallows. So it was like this rocky road. Rocky road. It didn't really work with my diabetes, but it was so good.
But did you have cottage cheese or cream cheese in it? Was it a kugel like that?
All that stuff, and then I added in the chocolate, the Nutella, and the Jif.
It must have been good, right? It must have been really good. It must have been simple.
How could it be bad?
But that's genius, Jeffrey, and someone's going to want to copy that. But
they are called Linzer cookies.
Any good Thanksgiving meal ends with dessert.
They are named after a town in Austria.
These tart jam-filled cookies and the luxurious gerbeau slices frequently grace Eva Moremi's table.
And my mother made it very nice. And it also has layers of walnuts and layers of a jam and then a chocolate on the top.
Just like how her mother Itza used to make it.
Her name is Ethel Yambor.
Reading off family recipe cards.
And she gave a recipe to my mom called Magdona.
But these cards aren't any old heirloom.
First she was in Auschwitz, where they only talked about food because they were starving and people were dying around them. And after a few weeks in Auschwitz, they were put on trains, she and her younger sister, with many other women, and taken to Germany, to a sub-camp of Buchenwald called Hessisch-Lichtenau, where they worked in the ammunition factory. It's called the Regal Mine 43.
Because the woman didn't have access to stationery at the factory.
Given to her by Mrs. Gersh.
Eva says Itza collected ammunition packing slips and found a pencil on the ground.
She pilfered these papers and in the evenings would write recipes that women shared among each other because they were hungry. They talked about food all the time.
One side, an identifier for German-made bombs that killed thousands.
And on the other side, my mother wrote a recipe, fig and nut slices, given to her by a Hungarian lady, Mariska.
At the end of it all, the cards ended up in the hundreds. A way of survival, a way of reminding themselves that one day, when they're free, they'll eat again.
These women tried to, in the most inhuman conditions, they try to remain dignified, civilized, and hopeful. And this was my mother's way of indirectly resisting the Nazis. This was her indirect resistance. But she had to be very careful and hide those recipes.
And just 2 years ago, Eva decided these cards couldn't stay in the dark.
Many of the recipes were given by memory.
Now they're at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Some of those recipes memorialized in Eva's new book called Hidden Recipes.
Were you nervous about doing that? Because you'll never hold it again.
Yes.
I know you have copies, but it's such a big part of you and a big part of your mom that you don't have anymore.
It was so hard for me to part with it. And I talked to my husband, I talked to my 3 children, and we decided we can't keep it inside our closet. It's time to donate, to tell the story. The story must be told. It's important.
Hidden Recipes isn't a cookbook. It's the story of 2 people, their survival, their resilience, and hope.
I used this photo on the front cover of my book. I didn't want this book to be sad. I wanted to show that after the war, when my parents met, that they strived to create a life, start all over. I was born a few years after the war, and they really just wanted to look ahead and make the best life.
That's what my Holocaust survivors taught me. They taught me that you can go from comfort to chaos and comfort again. And I know that to be true. And anytime I've had something challenging in my life, I've remembered not just Mary's words, but so many of their stories, because that's what they can teach us. And I know many of you are intimately involved in the Holocaust survivor community. Many of you are 2nd generation, possibly 3rd generation. Maybe some of you are survivors yourselves. I hope you'll share that with me as we openly speak after the talk. And they have a different perspective than the rest of us. Celia Kenner, she was a child. She was 7. She was pointed out on a playground by her school friends, who she played with safely days before. But a truck drove by with a bullhorn. "We're looking for Jewish children." And her friends pointed to her. And she was placed in the back of this truck. And she began to yell at the driver. "Why are you doing this to me? What did I do to you? Do you have children? Would you want them to do this to your children? He threw her off the truck. Saved her life, because Lord knows where that truck was going. She ended up in the ghetto along with her aunt and her uncle and several cousins. Her mother was a beautiful woman, and she never questioned what it is her mother did outside the ghetto, but she remained outside. And every now and again, her mother would sneak in and would give them information. And one night she came and she said to them, tomorrow night you hide.
My mother's recipe book is a very powerful example of what life was like before the Holocaust. I want the world to know that the Holocaust, well, it was real. There were real families destroyed. There were real communities destroyed. There was a real life that was destroyed.
Alon, how did you come to meet Stephen and learn about the Fenves family and their history?
So a couple of years ago, I came to visit the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I visited the archives there and found that there were many recipes that were rescued from the concentration camps and also donated to the museum from different families. Many years ago, about a decade ago, I was in Israel and was on a culinary tour and able to see recipes that were written on the back of bomb receipts, that were written on the back of scrap paper, pieces of cloth that were all written in the camps. And I was so moved by that. I really was wondering what food meant to people during that horrific time, and how food played a role in people's survival or people's mental state, how they survived mentally and also physically. And so when I was telling a friend in New Orleans about this experience and how I wanted to learn more about these recipes, she recommended that we go and see what the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. would have. And lo and behold, they had a whole plethora of recipes that were rescued from the war. After looking through many of them and really not being able to read any of them because they were all in Hungarian or Polish or Russian, I came across this cookbook, the Fenves family cookbook, and was informed that Stephen Fenves, who donated the book to the museum, lived close by and regularly volunteered at the museum. And I was that really hit me as an opportunity to reach out to Stephen and get firsthand knowledge of his memories and his experiences with food. And through this book, maybe if I was really lucky, be able to cook a few of these recipes and taste the food. And so Stephen and I began talking, and he has now been translating the recipes for me. And I've been cooking the food at my house and kind of working through deciphering the recipes, because a lot of them are just a list of some ingredients. There aren't many directions on technique or oven temperature. And so I've been working through the recipes and sending Stephen the food to taste, and he's been sending me back his critiques, and I've been making adjustments. So it's been an amazing friendship and journey that we've been on over the last year on developing these recipes out.
A really, really special joint venture. And Stephen, as you know, most survivors, very few, would have items like a family recipe book or even monetary value. Here you are on the sofa that she rescued, the love seat. But that the handwritten recipe book, the artwork from your mother's hand, it's hard for me to imagine the emotion that you must have felt upon seeing this.
This recipe that you see is also my mother's work. It was designed by her uncle, a very well-known architect, but it was hand-stitched the cover was hand-stitched by my mother and my grandmother. You can still see it prominently displayed in the Subotica City Museum.
Incredible. I've talked to you many times, and I never knew that your mother actually designed and created this. She was clearly a very, very talented artist.
At the bottom of the picture, you can see the boots that Esther was given by the British in Bergen-Belsen a year and a half after we came home. That was still the only pair of shoes she had.
Wow. Wow. So many layers to a seemingly straightforward photograph. But let's turn to the recipe book. Alan, the museum digitized this recipe book because it is very, very fragile. And that also made it clearer, able to handle it, so to speak, without it falling apart, but also for Stephen to translate and make accessible to you the table of contents and 13 of his family recipes. What did you learn from the information that Stephen translated for you? What doors did it open?
Well, I kind of got a glimpse into the Fenves life before the war and what life was like around the kitchen table, around the food. Through my conversations with Stephen, I learned all kinds of stories of him going to the market with Marish and with his mother and aunt and loading up on all the seasonal vegetables and fruits that were at the market. And I thought that it was really beautiful, the memories that he shared of bringing all that home and everyone working in the kitchen to pickle and preserve and can those things. But I also learned more about Marish, who is really such a hero. And I learned about what type of kitchen she ran. She was a very, very much of it sounds like a very strict cook. And there were some of the recipes, such as the potato circles, which Stephen told me about that I made, and how him and his sister weren't really even allowed to eat these. These were made for guests that were coming to the home that his parents were entertaining and reserved for special events. Stephen told me about one of his favorite recipes as a kid, this roasted turkey, in which the turkey meat was pulled off the bone and ground up and then packed back onto the turkey bones and then baked. And Stephen recalled kind of getting through all of that ground turkey meat to the meat that was sticking to the bones, and how that was him and his sister's favorite part of the turkey. I learned about, even though food was so important to the Fenves family that they had this big cookbook, it was really amazing to me to learn that it was one of the few things that Marish saved when she had a chance to enter the apartment. And it reminded me how important food plays, what an important role it plays in people's lives. And through learning the recipes and talking with Stephen about them, it was really nice to get a glimpse into the positive family moments that were so plentiful and so special prior to the occupation.
And Alan, you have really been living with these recipes for many months now, creating them, iterating them. Stephen, how have you told him when he's gotten things wrong, if he's gotten them right?
Well, we haven't tasted today's fare yet, but certainly what we have tasted before were really terrific. The ground turkey was great. The sticks, semolina sticks, which was a very frequent side dish, and the preserve that came in the previous package were all very authentic. And
Stephen said, make sure that the semolina sticks look like fish sticks. So as I was preparing the semolina sticks, I kept thinking in my head, like, make sure they look like fish sticks. And here's a picture of them. I think they do, and it really is essentially a cream of wheat. It's semolina wheat cooked down with milk and chilled, and then cut up and lightly breaded and fried, and they're delicious. I love them, and it's one of our favorite little snacks around the house now, thanks thanks to Stephen and the Fenves cookbook.
And Alon, you've been so generous. You've prepared these foods in New Orleans, packed them in dry ice, sent them to Stephen, even to me as a totally unexpected bonus for us to heat up or fry and taste here in the Washington area. So let's get to a recipe today. Stephen's family recipe book contains more than 140 recipes, but together you selected a walnut cream cake for today's program. Can you please tell us why you picked this recipe and how you prepared it and show it to us? And I know, Stephen, you're going to be tasting this cake for the first time in, 75 years or more. There it is, so gorgeous.
So yeah, this cake was one of the ones that Stephen had picked out as part of his memories of all of the sweets that would adorn the tables, and how he said he had such a sweet tooth growing up, and he remembers all these desserts. And when he sent me this recipe, I was really blown away. I was like, 5 cups of walnuts. Wow, that is a lot of walnuts. And then as I researched more, I realized how much walnuts are used in Hungarian cooking, and how they played a large role in the Fenves cookbook. So this moment here, where Stephen will be tasting the cake for the first time in 75 years, and a recipe from his family book, is what is moments that I live for. I've waited my entire career for these types of moments where through the food that I cook, I can share memories and I can share experiences and learn more about people and bring happiness to people.
So Stephen, go ahead. Let's dig in. I know this cake also, it's more than just something very delicious, but because it's made with nuts rather than flour, it was suitable for the Jewish holiday of Passover, where you can't use grain in cooking. To a modern sensibility, it's gluten-free.
Yep.
And I'm going to taste it too. Tell us a little of the technique of how you made it.
So part of the process was grinding the walnuts through a meat grinder. And I remember my grandmother, who's Bulgarian, always had a little meat grinder clamped to the side of our counter, and she would not only grind meat but also grind nuts for a lot of the things that she made. So it was a very common way to chop the walnuts into very fine pieces prior to folding them into the cake, which allows the cake to really rise and have a lighter texture with the walnuts ground up really fine. So that was a technique from the book too that really resonated with my grandmother's cooking and reminded me of the food that I was eating when I was growing up from my grandmother.
So lovely. We have an audience question from Amy asking, as we light the 7th candle for Hanukkah tonight, what did your family eat to celebrate the holiday? And did you have any other special traditions for Hanukkah? And actually letting Stephen finish chewing and tasting the cake, let's have a look, because it is traditional to make foods with oil for the Hanukkah holiday to celebrate the miracle of oil. And we have some video from a prior demonstration you did.
As I said before, my parents were not very religious. My paternal grandmother was. The weekly sholent, the bean dish for the Saturday noon meal, came from my grandmother. As far as I recall, most everything for Passover and almost everything for Hanukkah came from grandmother, not from Mauritius kitchen.
So it was really a family thing.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look at this video. Some of the foods you were talking about earlier, the semolina sticks being fried up. Stephen, what did it feel like when Alon brought to life, literally, these foods that you hadn't seen or tasted, the cake, the semolina sticks, the potato circles, in over 75 years? What did that mean to you?
The memorable things were the ones that exactly duplicated what I remembered, like the semolina sticks, and the ground turkey. The sweets, I'd probably remember them more closely because I must have had a very sweet tooth as a child. Eating this, I honestly, I cannot isolate the memory of this dish from memories of all the other sweet dishes, but certainly in terms of uh, uh, freshness, in terms of the lightness, the sweetness, the naturalness comes through. In a time, in a situation where there was no refrigeration, uh, uh, every new fruit of the season was celebrated with something, and I'm sure that at walnut harvesting time, there were a plethora of walnut dishes.
That's how 5 cups end up in one recipe. I'm sure they had a lot.
Hazelnuts was the same thing actually in the back of the apartment building. There was a row of hazelnut shrubs, and that was carefully guarded from us and collected for a hazelnut cake.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alon and Stephen, for making it so visible and really transporting us to a place before it was shattered. We have a very different food type question for you, Stephen. An audience member named Carl is asking, he writes, I heard when visiting Auschwitz that women would lay in the barracks verbally creating or comparing recipes to pass the little free time they experienced and to fend off the horrors of their situation. Can you add anything to that? Carl is asking.
In Auschwitz, I was in what was called the youth barracks, the place where nobody came ever to select slave laborers. So you were there until you died from starvation. The universal pastime was getting together in groups and talking about foods that you had eaten, and particularly making up stories of the meals you were going to order when you got out of there. So that was a very, very vibrant memory of reminder of the food. Much later on, when our children were small, it was a convenient bedtime story to talk about food that my sister and I liked and disliked. Creamed spinach on the top of the second list. And the kids remember those talks.
Thank you for that question, Carl. We know that, as Stephen has just remembered and you have described, that for many, many survivors, while they were in the camps, they could be stripped of all of their physical possessions, they could be stripped of their name and dignity and identity, but no one could strip them of what was in their heads and in their hearts. And that using memory to transport themselves to a time of plenty, to a time of comfort, to a time around their family table was a form of resistance and of spiritual sustenance. Alon, I'd like to, before we close, ask you a couple of last questions. A viewer named Sasha is asking, Chef, any plans to involve these recipes at Saba, which is your restaurant, sometime in the future?
Well, yeah, this entire experience of cooking through the Fenves cookbook has really not only inspired me, but so many of the cooks that I work with, our pastry chef at Safta in Denver, helped with testing the horseshoe tarts that we made, the poppy seed and walnut horseshoe tarts. And I think we're gonna, feature these on our menu at some point as a Fenves family recipe and be able to tell a little bit more about the story to our guests that come to the restaurant. So we hope that, the story of Marish continues to live on as the hero that saved this book and allowed these recipes to be enjoyed for future generations.
Well, Alon, you have certainly paid tribute to Marish, to her loyalty, to her bravery, and to the Fenves family. And I know you've brought a lot of happiness to Stephen, his wife, Norma, their kids and grandkids during this process. So thank you.
And they've brought a lot of happiness to me. So thank you, Stephen, to you and to your family for being so gracious and generous with with sharing this. It has been a monumental experience for me and so emotional to get a glimpse into your life through food.
And I want to thank you, Alon, for your interest and persistence in reviving these recipes and reviving these memories. And you, as I said before, you have created a friendship at distance, but certainly my admiration for you is continuous.
Thank you.
Okay, we used to have schmaltz over bread with garlic. I liked chicken liver, chicken soup, normal. We used to have being in Romania. We used to have mamaliga. I did not particularly care for it, but my mother had a particular favorite dish that was really my favorite, and it's apparently people from Bukovina used that. It was called false fish. It was not fish. Later in years, I found out it was made from chicken breast, but like meatballs. And you can eat them cold or warm, hot. And it was my favorite dish. Besides grivalach, all of the good fatty things, latkes. But interestingly enough, my mother used to prepare the false fischlach for the whole family for a week. Within 2-3 days, it was all gone.
Usually I like to show you the most mouth-watering fare, but today I want to show you something that is perhaps a little more of an acquired taste. Most of Hasidic food is just meat and potatoes classics. You usually don't find very exotic stuff in this community, and that's because all the food is kosher, and because it needs to be kosher, it needs to adhere to many restrictions on foods that are not allowed to be eaten or have to be prepared in a certain way. A lot of the cuisine is basic Eastern European with very heavy influences from the Middle East and America. But there are some foods that are a little bit of an acquired taste, and today I will introduce you to them. We must begin with kochena, as it's called in Yiddish, faglivitazaf, which means gelatin sauce. So the fish has been cooked in this water that has been turned into jello, and faglivitazaf is a specialty and part of the Shabbos fish. The Shabbos fish is usually salmon cooked in a water that gets faglivit, becomes kochena, and you eat it with a challah and the filter fish. I grew up on kochena. Shabbos diga fish has a lot of sugar, carrots, salmon essentially. It's good. Very nice. Sweet. This is griven. They told me this is chicken skins, but we had griven when we were kids. In the context of Passover, that we would not eat any produced oil on Passover, like canola oil or olive oil. We only made our own oil for Passover, and we made it with taking pieces of the chicken, cooking it in a big pot and getting all the fat out. And the fat would be called schmaltz, and the remaining chicken, which would get very crispy, we'd call grieben, and the grieben would get really salty, and you would eat it with mashed potatoes. The oil has not totally left. This is yapchik. It looks like a potato kugel has been overnighted. It also has beef in it, see? It tastes like it's been cooked for a long time. Definitely doesn't taste like potato kugel because there's a big chunk of meat. It doesn't look very gorgeous, does it? I like the potato kugel part. So this is galareta. I have never in my life tasted it, but I am at Gottlieb's Deli, and Mr. Gottlieb has just explained to me that this is cooked over 8 hours calf's knee. And eventually the juices that come out of it become gelatin. I am not a foodie, and this is intimidating me a little.
And we can have that.
Yeah, it's very garlicky. You have to get used to the texture. So this customer here in the deli just told me a story. This customer came in and wanted galareta, but he wanted it hot. So they warmed it up and it was returned to soup. He was very disappointed. It's like asking for your ice cream hot. Let's keep going. That was interesting. This is herring. There's a lot of versions of herring. Schmaltz is the fat of the animal, and this is regular. I'm trying to brace myself with one of them. I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between Schmaltz herring and Matthias herring?
First of all, it's a different type of fish, and the way we make it, it's a different type of texture. It's
And more intense.
more intense.
What do you suggest?
I like this one.
Okay,
I like
your
salt.
suggestion. Okay, I like salt too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Herring is a classic that I grew up with that the men in my family would eat. The women found this onion-infused dish a little much. So I don't even know if I ever ate herring in my life, but I know that it was always paired with these crackers called kichel. Kichel is a cracker that is neither sweet nor salty. It's a strange cracker. So we have two things in this very oily fish thing. We have the fish, the herring itself, and onions. It's very salty, but really delicious. I always thought it was a harder cracker, but it actually kind of crumbles in your mouth.
Yeah, overnight or night?
Overnight cholent?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do overnight cholent. Touching on cholent and kishka. I can never eat too much cholent and kishka. Cholent is a stew that is cooked especially for Shabbos lunch with beans, barley, beef. This particular cholent seems to have even lima beans, all sorts of beans in one big cholent. The word cholent is an expression for everything mixed together. And kishka, which literally is Yiddish for intestines, and formerly it would be that the intestines of the animal were taken, they were stuffed with flour and spices and cooked to get the flavoring from the animal in order to make the most of an animal. These days, the kishka is just made in a parchment paper with flour and oil. Pretty much, it's probably the most glutinous thing you can eat. It all goes together. I give it to my Friday tour people because that's when it's available in the neighborhood. And some people's reaction is like, woo, and other people really, really take to it. This is definitely the one item on my list that I am probably most habituated to. This is brona eier, which is Yiddish for brown eggs. Apparently it has a special name, which someone on Twitter told me, and I cannot repeat it for fear that I'll butcher it. But we just called it at home brona eier. It's eggs that cook at least overnight in the cholent, and they really take on the flavor of the cholent. This is like hard-boiled eggs, but with flavor. It is really good. Now you might think fake fish is some kind of vegan food, but actually made of chicken and eggs that is used on the holiday Passover for those families like my own that traditionally don't eat any fish on Passover. So for 8 days instead of fish, you eat falche fish, which are these balls with carrots and onions and eggs. Do you have schmatte cake? This is a cake, and it is not weird and gross at all, but it has a sort of weird name, and I really wanted to finish this list with something desserty, so this is schmatte cake. For those who are familiar, schmatte means rags, and I don't know why this is called rags cake because there's nothing raggy about it. It is flaky crust on the bottom, a wet brownie, a little bit of cream, flaky crust on the top, and then some confection sugar. You're gonna like it. There's gonna be one thing we both agree on. It's gonna be the schmatte cake.
Yeah.
It's very sweet though. You like very
Am I
sweet?
gonna get a chance to eat it, or are you gonna eat the whole thing?
Do you think I'm going to eat the whole thing?
Gefüllte Fisch, ich habe es. Und einmal hat es sich getroffen, als die Mama zugekriegt, die gefüllte Fisch. Und es ist gewesen in Kirch, also wie ruft man es, ein Closet, wo man legt da rein Tellern, also weiter. Und sie hat reingestellt den Fisch. Und als es gekommen Zeit zum Essen, hat sie es aufgeöffnet und es ist gar nicht gewesen, kein Polizei, kein gar nicht. Es ist gewesen ein Dumbwaiter. Das heißt, wir haben verloren unser ganzes Freitag zu Nachts Essen. Da war es immer hat geraten wird, unsere Fisch. Also lernt man sich leben in Amerika.
But Italians and Jews, very similar. You know, people say same corporation, different division. All right? We get along. There's an obvious, thing with the religion. I went to my first Passover dinner. That's what she's like, my mother's going to have Passover. Okay, we'll go to the dinner. 7:30, we sit down at her mother's house. I'm starving, right? Starving. They start passing out pamphlets, like reading material. I'm like, what's going on? What are we doing here? What's with the... She's like, no, we read for 2 hours. 2 hours? I said, listen, I'm Italian. As soon as I sit at a table, I gotta have bread within 15 seconds of sitting down, all right? I need something to do with my right hand. I need some oil coming out. We got oil? I need oil, now. Hungry. And the food they start bringing out, oh God, terrible, terrible food. Jews have no idea what the hell they're doing in the kitchen. These people have no cuisine. Celery, crackers, jam. I'm like, what is it? We're losing people. People are leaving. We need food. After breakfast, they fall apart, the Jews. After a bagel, cream cheese, lox, where are they going? They got nothing. They have nothing. Has anybody ever said to you, we went to this Jewish restaurant last night? The gefilte, amazing. I respect the Jews, but let's just have the Italians cater the Passover meal, all right? Come on. I could read for a couple of hours with some meatballs on the table.
And, a lot of people don't realize, they think of Poland, of course, and they think of Germany and Hungary and Austria. But by percentage, the Greek people suffered the greatest losses during the Holocaust, and no different than what happened in Hungary when the war came to Greece, and those who were fortunate were hidden by their Christian neighbors, and many were aided by Turkey at the time, who were an ally and helped many of them. But more than 90% of Greek Jews went straight to Auschwitz. And like the Hungarian Jews, they were part of the true final solution. And they did not survive for very long in internment. And when I spoke to my Greek survivors, well, they're not really Greek. They're Sephardic. They're Spanish by origin. My father's family is Sephardic. My grandfather's family came from Spain. They were exiled and they settled in the Isle of Rhodes. And so many of the recipes that I got from my Greek survivors represent these wonderful Sephardic traditions. And in the book, there is a lentil soup that some balsamic vinegar just oozes to the top of the soup and adds this fabulous zing. And I was told so many times from my survivors from Greece that dill is the herb of choice, and it adds so much flavor. And if you could bottle the essence of lemon zest and olive oil, it would take you to the Sephardic community, because those are the ingredients that really speak to their cuisine. And so the book represents so many different aspects of what I will call Jewish food, because it represents food from Latin America, from South America, from South Africa. And Faith, thank you, because I'm going to say food is the language of our soul. It is what feeds us. And so I appreciate that it's resonating with you on that level, because this is what our culture celebrates. It is the ability for Jewish people, even in times like what we are experiencing right now, to turn to the more traditional aspects, not necessarily the spiritual aspects and the religious aspects, but I'm finding that it's these communal aspects that bring us together as a community, especially during these challenging times, that help us heal. And that's what food did for Holocaust survivors.
Hello.
Hi, Ruth. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Ariel.
Hello, Ariel, sweetheart.
I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Me too.
Thank you for having me. This is such a gorgeous home.
It's a wonderful apartment that I love.
So I'm here today with you to learn how to cook this delicious dish that your mother used to make for you.
Right.
Right? So can you tell me what it's called?
It's called kasha varnishkis.
Kasha varnishkis.
Good,
right?
good,
Yeah?
good, yes.
Okay. Ruth, can you tell me where you were born?
I was born in Vienna, February 22nd, 1928. I was 10 years old when Hitler marched into Austria on March 12, 1938. And my brother was then 6 years old. And we were in Vienna until the end of 1938, December of 1938, when we were on the first Kindertransport to Holland, and the rest of the kids who were on our train went to England. And I was in Holland, in The Hague, for 6 weeks in a converted school.
Okay, so let's get to it. Are you hungry?
Am I hungry right now? No, not really, but I can always eat.
Okay, me too. I'm
Good.
hungry. Let's go.
Good.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
The war started September 1st. And the Dutch people said, we kept the kids safe all this time. We're not going to let them go back to Vienna now. So everything stood still all over again. Go see what's doing with those onions.
They smell really good. Why do we use kosher salt instead of...
That's the only salt I've ever used in my whole life.
Yeah? What's the difference between this
I don't know. It's a little coarser. but that's what my mother used, and that's what I use.
It has like a nutty smell to it.
A what?
A nutty.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You got a good nose. Let's get the schmaltz.
Ooh, sushi.
Mine.
What does your doctor say?
Who asks?
About schmaltz.
I don't ask.
No?
No. But you know what? I saw 2 doctors in the last 3 weeks, and they were both happy with me. So
more schmaltz.
What more can I ask? And you know, schmaltz is just for the taste, because it's different.
Yeah, well, there's no sugar.
No.
No fiber, but 13 grams of fat in 1 tablespoon.
Right, exactly. I just used 3.
Great. See that schmaltz there? So much fun. She's an amazing lady. Hi.
How are we doing?
Good. I was holding down the fort.
We came to the United States October 26, 1939, In the meantime, we'd had a big storm in the English Channel, and I thought I was going to die. So I wrote a letter to my parents saying goodbye. But I didn't need it, thank goodness, because I'm still here. There we are. I think we're done.
Voila.
So what we'll do is eat it, right?
Ready to eat. Thank you.
So b'tei avon, which in Hebrew means healthy appetite.
Okay.
Or
This is
good
my
appetite.
first time trying this.
I hope it's good. You never know. Good. Great.
But I remember the Passover with the cleaning of the house and the changing of the dishes, and especially my mother making a sponge cake every day with 12 eggs and whipping the whites with a wire whisk. And when the cake was in the oven, we had to tiptoe so that it wouldn't fall. And then we managed to eat it all so that she would make another one. And so the next day, so every day of Passover, we had a sponge cake.
Tell our story. She never saw any of them again. And her mother came the next morning, put her under a cloak, ushered her out of the ghetto, and took her to a farmhouse where she had found a woman who would take care of her. And Celia was in the back of this woman's home in a windowless room. She was safe, and she was there for well over a year, closer to 2, at which point a neighbor was hung for having hidden a Jewish child. And the mother of this family said to Celia, "I cannot risk the life of my family. I need to move you." And her husband suggested an orphanage, and that's what she was about to do. She says, "I can't bring myself to that because I don't know it could be safe." So instead, she took her to the barn, and she said to her, "I will bring food for the animals every 3rd day. Do the best you can to survive." She says, "And there is some rumbling on the top. I don't know what that is, but I hope you'll be safe." And Celia went into that barn and she climbed up those stairs and she got to the rafters, and up in the corner was a woman cowering, shivering. It was her mother. She had been there for 9 months, unbeknownst to the woman in the house. And she was dying. And every 3 days, Celia went down the steps, got the feed for the animals, and she and her mother ate that until they were liberated. And the 2 of them together walked out of that barn. And they were reunited with her father. And she lived a wonderful life.
Of course, we always had challah on Shabbos. And my mother would always have chicken soup on Friday night, which I loved. I was a good eater. I really enjoyed almost anything that was ever served me. But I would look forward to soup especially. And I'm thinking now in terms as a kid in school. And I often would ask my mother right after breakfast before I left for school, "Mom, what are we going to have for dinner tonight?" You know, that kind of thing. And I think about it during the day.
In Our Memories Kitchen, created and produced by Jeffery B. Giesener, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust, and October 7th Remembrance International, and Stand Against Hate communities. Now stay tuned for In Your Memories Kitchen Overtime, located on youtube.com at youtube.com/@JewishCulture show/videos.